Well, welcome to another Lunch with Philip and Greg. Our guest today is Rick Young, who is a producer, director, editor, author, pretty much everything in the production field. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. That's very complimentary.
And I think it's a little bit ironic in that there's probably right now the most equipment that's ever been in this building, and we're shooting with the simplest possible setup because Rick's traveling, shooting across a couple of different countries.
And everything is out of sight.
And everything is out of sight, but we could be shooting this with what, F5s or F7s?
Well, I got two F3s. I've got at least 4 cameras with me. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But that would have required people.
It would have required more setup. I can guarantee that. We could have just put it there and hit record. But this is your format. This is the way it works. So it's a good way to do it.
So tell us a little bit about what is it that you're doing in this time, this trip, and in general the last year or two.
Well, I get booked for a lot of work in some exotic locations, which sounds fantastic. And I also get booked for a lot of work in maybe not, basically locations which are not exotic. Right. So it could be anywhere in the UK, it could be throughout Europe and the US, and basically it could be in many places in the world. And the reason I mentioned exotic is because certainly this month has been a very busy month. I was filming in Vietnam, then I was filming in Hawaii, both for a big company, major. It's basically a reward program for their workers that have done really well. They get taken somewhere fantastic, and then we film it, and that's their memories of it. And they use it for other purposes, like inspiring their staff to work very hard next year. So those are the exotic ones, and they're wonderful, and they work you hard, but the fact is you get to go to great places and film in the most fantastic places, stay in great hotels and eat good food.
And see the inside of a lot of great hotels.
That's it, and you do, and they are nice hotels, but when it comes down to it, it's still a hotel, and what I like is being out on location. What am I doing now? I'm spending a lunch with you guys, which is fantastic, and we're in a beautiful location, which is California, Chatsworth, looking across mountains, which you can't see because the cameras are pointing this way, but you can see how nice the light.
We'll cut in some B-roll, as you've just seen.
It's a great place, and I get as inspired about this as I do about being in Vietnam, Hawaii, or many of the other places. So I do a lot of filming on location. That's what I do. I also edit. Sometimes I'm only filming, sometimes I'm doing both. It could be something as exciting, like I said, as Vietnam or Hawaii. It could be a conference centre in London or anywhere in the UK. So really how exciting is it just depends on the job. So that's what I do. Other than that, I've written several books about Final Cut Pro. Right. Mm-hmm. Final Cut Pro 10 is certainly what I've done in the last few years since the demise of 7 and whatever went before. And sometimes I get home to my wife and kids. Yes. That's the other thing.
which is in the UK, even though you're an American citizen who lived most of his life grew up in Australia. That's and right. Then now you're in the UK, so true citizen of the world.
It's exactly that. I was 3 years old.
You pay taxes everywhere.
Well, you have to, the US government wants to know what you're doing. So I was born in the US, yes. Grew up in Australia. At age 29, I moved to the UK, and I'd been there almost 20 years, so you can work out my age from that.
So you consider yourself Australian?
Well, Australia is home because that's where I grew up. And I think it doesn't matter that I was born in the US. I was only 3 years old. There's a few memories. But where you grow up and where your formative years took place, to me, that's home.
And it's, as we were talking about yesterday, you and I share a lot of common sort of memories of growing up.
Oh, we
which
do.
I think are quintessentially Australian memories.
Definitely. Well, basically, Philip, yourself and myself all grew up in Australia, and I honestly think that there's something about Australian culture which is different from the rest of the world. I don't think anyone would argue against that. So we had a very similar sort of background growing up in middle-class Australia. Yeah. And I wasn't in the massive cities. I was in Perth, which isn't the biggest city in Australia, but it was very nice and great place to grow up. And I was always very happy to grow up in like a middle class existence because whatever I achieved in my life came through my efforts. I wasn't born into money, I wasn't born into this. So if I had talents and was able to develop them, and Australia really, certainly when we were growing up, it was a very middle class. A lot of people were very equal, so to speak. It doesn't mean there weren't some people that had more money and some that had less, but it was a very even, level-headed, normal way to grow up. Yeah. That's what I feel.
jokingly say that I knew I'd adapted to working and living in America when I put on a business card, big brains for rent. Because in Australia, I would have been totally eviscerated for making such a claim about oneself. You know, one just doesn't do that. Yeah. So how did you get a start in your career?
Well, I went to film school,
Okay.
which a lot of people would shun these days, but I think it was excellent. One, the gear wasn't accessible then, but not only that, it's hard to become a filmmaker on your own. Yeah. You need to interact with people and you need to learn from people. So obviously went to film school, got into the local TV station on work experience, spent about 6 months there, coming in once a week, maybe twice a week while I was still finishing my studies. And eventually they offered me a job, so I was an editor. Trainee editor, worked up to editor, eventually moved into video graphics, vision mixing, pressing the buttons while the live programs were on air. Then I was live directing. After 9 years at the station in Perth, having done many different jobs, I knew that I wanted to go to the UK and work in bigger places. In fact, I say I knew I wanted to go to the UK. I was thinking of going to Sydney, and I was already I was already directing in Perth, and I rang them up and they said, well, we'll get you in as a vision mixer, and maybe over the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, you can work up to being a director. Right. I got a plane, went to the UK, and I was directing within 2 weeks at Sky TV. And then...
How did you pull that off? Many people would like to know, I think.
How did I pull that? Well, I worked in television for 9 years in Australia, and a lot of people I knew had already gone to the UK, and they'd all done quite well. I didn't know of anyone that hadn't done quite well, reasonably well, and a lot of them had done very well. So I guess I had a few contacts. I went a year before I went to move there just to have a look, rang up the senior director at Sky News. I said, this is who I am, this is what I can do. Immediately he said to me, I need 2 directors now. Okay. And I said, I can't. I'm not in a position to just move away. As it was, I'd just taken another job at the same TV station in Australia, which was for online editing, which is something that doesn't really exist so much now. But back in those days, big suites, 5 tape machines, vision mixer, character generator, DVE, audio mixer, all the separate components, and one person had to drive it all. It was quite skilled. Not that I was so skilled, I was learning how to do that. They'd taken me in to learn the online suite, so I wanted that background. So I said to the senior director, look, I'm definitely coming back in a year, but I'm not ready to move over now. I just wanted to show my face. Came back a year later, rang him up, he said, come on in. Came on in, and his words to me were, have we met before? I didn't even think he remembered me. But whatever the case, it didn't matter. He gave me work. I started freelancing on the night shift. And over what was at least a 5-year period, I managed to work at Sky, ITN, BBC, all live directing. Well, I say all live directing, I did do some editing work as well. But basically, I fulfilled my dreams in live directing. And then I didn't want to do it anymore. I'd done so much of it, and I was sort of heading towards 35, and you don't see very many old television directors around. Okay. Usually they don't stick around much past about 40. And not only that, I didn't want to be locked up in studios. So I kind of bought into DV cameras when they were new. Well, I bought my first one in 97, already 2001. So I'd done some work, but I moved a lot more heavily into those areas. Bought some more expensive cameras, not the, not bottom of the line DV cameras. I moved up the realms a little bit. And I kind of fell into different things along the way. Shooting for clients, big events, conferences. I did a whole bunch of video work for a very highly renowned violinist who was at the top of his field, and I mean that work went on for 6 months. It was massive, the amount of stuff he needed done, and even now we keep in touch and he talks about other projects. So a complete cross-section of different things, but I kind of made myself into a cameraman editor, or a producer director, or a director that shoots. I mean, there's many titles you could use to describe that sort of work, but that's where I'd gone. And
the catch-all, multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, and the thing I'll say about being multi-skilled is a lot of people think they can do it all, they can shoot and edit, but those that really can do it, there's not that many around. So once clients are happy with you and you've established yourself and they know what you can do, it's quite a loyal industry. Loyal as long as you've got a decent personality, they can stand having you around, and 2, as long as you can do the work and what's required, they do come back to the same people. I see that on a lot of the jobs. You know, there's a lot of people that we barely ever meet in the UK, but I see them on the jobs in Barcelona, I see them on the jobs in Hawaii, and we are the crew, and that's what we do.
So you've embraced this democratization.
I embraced it from the moment it was already out there, but I was already in a good state to do that, having worked as well. You said how'd I get into television, and I said I'd go in a day or 2 a week on work experience. A day was with the camera guys, and a day was with the editors. So I learnt those skills early on in a time where cameras were really expensive, like probably 80,000 Australian dollars for a Betacam, and an edit suite was something you had to hire by the hour for an online. Well, I say an online suite. Any sort of suite where you could turn out a product and not have to write down the timecode numbers and go somewhere better. Even a Betacam suite was probably $100 an hour. So I mean, maybe it was a bit less. Maybe it was $80 an hour. I really can't remember. But in terms of embracing the democratization of all the technology, I was there. As soon as they brought out DV cameras in '96, which was late '96, I was already watching it, and early '97 is when I bought my first camera. Took a little bit longer to get an editing system I could work with.
That's right.
But
yeah. Final Cut was released in 98 or 99? 99.
Well, 99 is what I remember, and I had the first PAL version, which was 1.2. So as soon as they had it ready for PAL, I was there.
Oh, I can one-up you on that.
I know you can. We talked about this before. You were doing PAL on a version never designed for PAL.
That's correct.
Is that right? Yeah.
I had my claim to fame is that I had a commercial on air in Australia cut with Final Cut Pro 1 beta in PAL on a system that didn't officially support PAL. So it was really that it hadn't been tested in PAL. That's the main reason why they didn't come with PAL presets. Yeah. But it actually, if you set the presets right, it did work just fine.
I bet not many people actually knew that, or would have had the skill to actually go through the presets and be able to key in the appropriate things for PAL.
I think all the information was in the manual, but then I do read manuals.
But, you know, that's why later versions of Final Cut got easy setups, because people didn't understand presets.
I remember those easy setups.
I remember teaching a class here in Venice, Monday, Tuesday or Monday of one week, when I had to teach all of the old presets, the old method of no simple setups. So how important it was to match your sequence and your capture settings and getting all that matching up perfectly, knowing full well that I had been beta testing the next version of Final Cut that could have been released at any moment. And indeed was released on the morning of the second day of this course, where I had to come back in and say, well, everything I showed you yesterday is now completely and absolutely irrelevant.
You know, I
had to teach it knowing that was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it probably wasn't irrelevant, because the skill set of understanding what you're doing is always good. Even if you can go to a menu and say, I want this, and you press one button, to know how to do it without having to go to it, those thought processes are quite valuable. At least I think so.
I think that's part of what we miss out with the democratization, though, isn't it? Because people can just buy a camera, buy Final Cut Pro 10 and put it on a laptop or an iMac or whatever they've got.
Yeah, but how good are they with it? The tools, that's half of it. It's the processes of what you do with it, as well as being able to get it in your hands. And they go...
Knowing how to shoot something that will actually be what you want. There's something that will go together and edit.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's like a language, filmmaking, and you need to understand how to shoot, how to edit, how to put it all together. And without that, it doesn't matter where you could have Alexas and the best tools in the world that possibly exist and still not be able to do anything with it.
But it's a language that's constantly evolving. I mean, change is upon us all the time. We talked earlier about Betacam suites and 3/4 inch suites and tape-to-tape editing where we started, but that's a horrible idea now. How do you embrace that change?
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, certainly the move from Final Cut 7 to Final Cut 10 was a big one. That's the most recent one. But I must have used 5 or 6 or 7 different editing systems in my time anyway. You're always doing the same things. I know you say it's always evolving, and the technology is certainly evolving, and even the process of what we do does evolve, but I think that evolves at a slower pace than the technology. And what I'm trying to say is, if you can edit, then whether you were cutting on film or cutting on an NLE, it doesn't really matter. You're still putting pictures and sound together. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't change stylistically what they do. You know, flash frames between edits and wipes, and
even just the pace of editing has increased. You know, once upon a time, a 6 or 7 or 8 or 10-second shot was not unusual, and now if you hold for more than 3 seconds, people are yawning and looking to flip to another channel.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, it depends what you're trying to do. Are you trying to make a video for yourself, or you're trying to make it for the clients? And I do both. So when you're doing it for yourself, you do whatever you want. If you want to have mega quick cuts, do it that way. If you want it to be, you know, an older style of editing, that's fine as well. But when you're working for the clients, you need to basically give to them something they're happy with, and you can get a sense of what they're after. You almost need to be a mind reader, but not really a mind reader. You need to sense what they're after, and you show them the edit, and they'll tell you what they like and what they don't like. But backtracking a little bit, I actually joked with a friend client that I've done a lot of work for, and I said, you know, I'm basically a 1950s filmmaker. Cuts, maybe some dissolves. It's very stock standard what I do. And he goes, no, not 1950s, 1980s. That's what he said to me. And I thought that was so funny. But, you know, that's the era I grew up in. And I can really understand that maybe I am like a 1980s filmmaker, because I'm not heavily effects laden in my productions. I want to tell a story that really does tell a story through the pictures and images and sound, not a throw together. I'm not trying to wow people visually unless the shots are beautiful. Then let them be wowed visually. But I'm not trying to load it with effects and be so contemporary that, you know, I'm showing everyone how good I am and what I can do, and this is progressive editing. I'm trying to tell a story, and that's it. And the impact is whatever it is. And that's kind of how I see it. So how do you deal with the change? You must keep up technologically, meaning you must be able to use the equipment. If you're not tech-minded in some way, I think you might have a lot of problems working today with the modern gear. You have to be. It's not like you're just splicing, putting a bit of tape on to hold the film together. And not anything down on all that. That was great for the time, but now, I mean, look, I went through the whole online thing. We spoke about it. Working with EDLs, thinking in numbers. That was one of the most difficult things I ever had to do. So having gone through that background, and even Final Cut in the early days, and Avid, and a bit of Media 100, and I did have a look at Grass Valley as well, even though I never really used it.
Oh, the Grass Valley non-linear editor was just Media 100 badge engineered.
I know, but I'm remembering I'm remembering the online suites, and there were pegs and all sorts of strange things. It was like a different language. That was really hard, and that was in my 20s when I probably was, I'm not saying my mind doesn't think well now, but you're really kind of sharp and open to ways of learning when you're at that age. And, you know, I'm still open now, but maybe closed in other ways, because I know what I like and I know what I want to work with. I know what I need. So you find what works for you. In those days, I go into one place, I work on their editor. I go into another place and work on another editor, because I wanted to work, and you couldn't do it at home. So I was trying to expose myself to as much as possible in terms of technology to get really good at it. I thought that was really important, and it was important, and it prepared me for now with what I've got to do in the work that I do these days, and certainly the last decade, since it all moved away from tape and all became non-linear. I mean, I don't know if there are any tape places left. I mean, there's probably some place that still has.
I'm sure there's somebody has to still duplicate 3/4-inch dubs for some TV station in the middle of a state.
That would be true, but that's duplicating. I can't imagine that anyone would be cutting on tape these days.
Or cutting on tape.
Unless it's some guy that just bought some of the old gear and he keeps it running for his own anorak type reasons. And I bet there's some of those around.
There are.
Yeah.
Fortunately, so we could actually access a lot of that stuff.
Well, we need to. I mean, I've got tapes going back to the 90s, 1-inch open reel C format. At least there's places you can take that and get it transferred to another format.
But VHS is starting to get harder and harder to get transferred. I mean, we don't have a player, and
no, it's that's what happens with technology, and it's worth, if you've got important stuff, when these things fall away. When these things fall away, like I got a bunch of DV tapes and my last DV camera that I held on to, knowing I could have got a good price for it about 5 years ago. I was offered about £800 for it. And I actually thought, no, I'm going to keep this. I've got nothing to play the stuff back on. Well, that stopped working. So I have nothing to play the stuff back on now. And that's where it's at. And I think there's a lot of people in that position. So yeah, it's worth keeping that in mind for important stuff. Transfer it before all of that stuff stops working, and then you're left with either an expensive bill to take it somewhere that will transfer it at whatever their rate per hour is, or you might be looking on eBay for an old machine that you might find in working condition if you're lucky.
And you might pay a lot of money for it, since someone was willing to pay £800.
Well, that was a Sony camera back in the days when a lot of people still were shooting on tape. It was probably a £1,500 camera that was still current at the time, even though card-based cameras had come in. I mean, we're talking, I say 5 years ago, it could have been 6 or 7 years ago, whenever it was at that crossover period. And a lot of people did not want to move away from tape. They wanted those tapes on the shelf. They weren't happy with it all being on a hard drive. They had very valid reasons for using that technology. One of my valid reasons for using it at the time was that the clients would actually pay me for the tape, so I'd make money on those, and they'd pay me to capture them. Did I want to hand all that work away? Well, not really, but it wasn't just that. It was that the card-based systems were so expensive early on. It would have cost me a lot of money to have done the change incredibly early. And I did do the change early. It's just that I did it incrementally with the gear. I didn't swap all my cameras over. I bought one card-based camera, which was a Sony EX1. So I had that, but I still had, 2 or 3 other tape-based cameras, because I did and still do a lot of multi-camera. So it was a transition to becoming tapeless, and for me, not just one camera. It was a overall workflow thing. Yeah, and hard drives were not as cheap as they are now either. So you could actually lose money and pay more and earn less by stepping up in technology. And as a business model, that just seemed not the way to go.
And although tapes do deteriorate, they deteriorate far more slowly than hard drives do.
Well, if a hard drive stops working, it stops working. And you can end up in a position where you can either pay a data recovery place a lot of money to try and get into those platters, and something could have gone wrong and they just can't get in there. Whereas tapes I've got from 15 years ago will still play. And I have seen a few issues if they're not kept in a decent environment or whatever, but you usually get something off them, even if it's got dropouts or whatever.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Although the Mike Walsh Show had trouble with their 20th anniversary reels back, this is a long time, old Australian television.
I remember the Mike Walsh Show, yeah.
But when they came to do their anniversary, they found that all of their tapes pretty much were useless, the whole 20 years of history, because being a Channel 9 show, they didn't have a lot of office space for the different productions, so they basically bought up the whole row of houses in the street leading up to Channel 9. Yeah. And each of the productions had a house. Well, they kept the tapes in the enclosed veranda, porch.
In the heat of the Australian sun, the humidity.
And then the cold of the Australian winter. So, shrink, expand, shrink, expand, shrink, expand, with tape and oxide shrinking and expanding at slightly different rates over 20 years of daily expansion and contraction. You do have to be careful. I think I'd rather have the Badger Compact flash cards in that situation. But
yeah, but most people don't keep their stuff on flash media. It goes on hard drives, and they can stop working as well. See, a lot of people don't realise that Australia can be quite cold as well as hot. Oh yeah. So the winters can be really cold. You can be 0 or below Celsius, and not necessarily all the time, but it does hit those temperatures, and then real extremes of heat in the summer. And what you said, that will cause the oxide to fall off the tapes. And so what happened with the Mike Walsh Show? Did they actually get it back, or was it gone?
No, it was lost. It was gone forever. I mean, I remember a great tirade in the anniversary show about how lousy tape was compared with film. Because, of course, Mike Walsh showed a lot of cinemas and was a huge film buff in as well. But obscure Australian television history, just what you tuned in for.
Well, let that be a lesson to us all, that those important tapes, whatever you got on hard drive, and a lot of it will be important as client work or as some of the best work you may have ever done, but it's also going to be your kids, your family, people that, I mean, I'm 49 years old now, so in 25 years I'll be 74. Now, that's something I don't think a lot about, but footage that I've got now that will be important to my children and their children and those sorts of things. These are things worth considering from time to time so that it just does not disappear forever.
Yeah. Yep, I mean, multiple copies spread across lots of locations. There was a reason why I sent copies of my family films to everybody that was in part of it, because now there's a copy in 3 places in Australia, 5 places in Australia, as well as my personal backups and off-site backups.
And here's something worth saying as well. I told you my last DV camera stopped working. Curiously, it stopped working just after I'd transferred my sister's wedding from, I believe it was 1999. So we're already talking 17 years ago. And I just got the thing transferred, ejected the tape, and the mechanism wouldn't eject. So basically that's what's gone on it. And I since got it open, but now it won't load properly and play another tape. So I could possibly send it off to Sony, get that camera repaired if I wanted to. But I'll wait till I have a need and when I have to. But what I'm saying is I took that because my sister had a baby, okay? And I wanted, as part of the gift, was to give them a DVD and a QuickTime file with their wedding from 1999, because I thought tape's not going to last forever and we might not be able to play those. So the last time I played it and transferred it is when the camera stopped playing. So that's what I was trying to do, was access the material when it stopped working. So let it be a lesson to everyone out there that this is important stuff. I think so.
Yeah. A lot of people that we have lunch with have been complaining about the changing economic environments from when they were earlier in their career. You know, they obviously have been in a position where they can make a lot of good money early in their career. Have you found that across your work that it's becoming harder to make a good dollar, a good income?
No.
The downside of the democratization is...
I haven't found that at all. Yeah. But it might be that I've been responsible for taking some other people's work away that never wanted it to be taken away. And I don't mean that literally, that I've gone in and taken anyone's work. But when you've got one guy that shoots and edits, they don't need a producer, an editor, and a cameraman necessarily. And that doesn't always work. A lot of the time they do. They need all of that. But I think, thinking about it, what really might have happened is it opened up more opportunities. There are certainly jobs that have gotten done that wouldn't have been possibly done before because they might have needed 3 people if they can send 1 person in. Maybe I've been lucky and I've been doing this a long time, so I've got a client base and they do keep coming back. I think it comes back to what we said before, just because it might be more affordable doesn't mean that the skill level is any less. You still need to be able to use the gear and come up with quality results. And there are definitely clients out there that want to spend a decent amount of money for a good job, that they don't necessarily want it to be really affordable and, you know, get something less as a result. You get what you pay for, and quality operators, whatever level they work at, you know, they cost money. And I think clients do understand that. So I haven't seen it affect my work in that way at all.
Yeah, one of the things I think we did it ourselves was, for the longest time, we pushed that we could do a certain level of production because we had a particular piece of gear, you know. Well, because I'm broadcast, because I've got Betacam or XP, or I've got Digibeta later on, or I've got an F3 or an F7 and records this, not that. And so, but
I was talking with somebody at NAB who was part of the democratization that brought in Media 100. So, you know, the people that we hang around with, right?
Yes.
So, of course, when Media 100 came out and suddenly there was this much more affordable entry level, you know, the bar lowered and there were more people able to do a very, very high quality of work than there were prior to that. So that was great. There were suddenly more people and here was an opportunity. And of course, you know, they possibly were displacing work from higher end houses, but the bar continued to lower. So these guys who had new opportunities with Media 100 suddenly were being priced out because the bar continues to drop. And you know, there was a little bit of bitterness in the media, particularly the Media 100 users, when they were losing out work to
a DV camera and Final Cut.
Exactly, yeah. And so, you know, it's like the trend that happened that gave these guys the opportunity continued to happen and kind of took that opportunity away, which is, it's kind of sad.
Well, It's the continual evolution. This is this is what we've been talking about. It's not only evolution of the technology, but it's evolution of the business models that go with it.
I think there was also some real strong bastions, like we're not going to change, and they were still shooting on Digibeta for years after DV cameras came in, and they may have, or they would have definitely changed eventually, because Digibeta is not the system that we use today. But a lot of them have stayed with the more high-end cameras as well, and as the affordable technology gets better and may encroach on some of that space, it's almost like perhaps some of the people that weren't willing to adapt have fallen away, but those that are willing to adapt, I mean, it doesn't matter. You're shooting with a camera. You still do the same things. You're doing an interview. You're doing, a multi-camera piece. You're doing a corporate, whatever it is that you're doing. It's almost irrelevant which camera it is. Obviously, if you're shooting on a format that looks terrible compared to one that looks good, then it matters. But there's a lot of choice within.
In terms of production, being able to afford 2 or 3 cameras for less than what one of those $80,000 cameras would have cost back in the day makes multi-camera production much more flexible. Whether that's necessarily a good thing, because we have more footage to go through, more footage to try and just make decisions between. It's not just more storage. Yeah,
I think the expectation has probably been raised as well, because someone said it years ago that, and this was early on with Final Cut, he said, just because we now have this wonderful system and maybe we can do things quicker, he said it doesn't mean we work less time, it just means the clients expect more from us. They still want to get the most out of you that they can, and so they should, because you're there producing work for them. They're paying you whatever they're paying you, and they want a good result, and you should want a good result. You should want a good result for them as well. So when it comes down to it, we can do more than we used to be able to do,
which is great.
Yeah.
But they expect more every step along the way. They expect to find finished effects. They don't expect to see montage in here later, or we'll put in the proper titles. Now, even on a feature film, the preview screenings have to have effects done. They have to have a temporary music bed. Every time they want to do a screening during the production process, it's 2 or 3 days preparation, and that's why that tools that are less affordable, but they're like Slice X and Mocha for tracking can be used in these feature films, simply because they're not the finished effects, but they're very damn close to it. And you can have it at any time in the production process.
Right. And they've used Blackmagic cinema cameras in some really high-end films because they shoot raw, and because you can put a good lens on there and get some wonderful images. It doesn't mean they're not using their Alexas. It doesn't mean they don't have the top-end equipment, multi-cameras being used, all sorts of things. But there's room for everything in this industry. And if anything, I think the affordable democratization, as we call it, of technology, and the fact that we can all get our hands on it, it's opened up a lot of new opportunities, and I think there would be an argument that it's opened up more opportunities than it's closed opportunities along the way. Something always comes about, something else might fall away, but I remember Digibeta cameramen that would not use the lighter cameras, and a lot of them ended up not working in the industry that much longer, but maybe they were heading towards some form of retirement anyway by that stage.
Or the back problems caught up with them.
Yeah, that could be it. Exactly, that could be it.
I don't know of a single, I only know a couple of people who worked as cameramen in that era, but they have various problems, sciatica or shoulder problems, simply from so much lugging and hefting of those heavy camera and then recorder.
I once heard it described like having a suitcase on your shoulder, and that's a very unnatural thing to do, have a camera that weighs a lot pushing down one side of your body. If you change shoulders every now and again, that might have evened it out, might have caused more problems, who knows. But no cameraman in the world, or camera woman, would have ever been changing shoulders, so I can see that it would have had an impact. Yeah. But there's so much wonderful technology around now, and I don't necessarily really like DSLRs. It's not my thing. And I like the bigger cameras because you've got your XLRs, you've got everything there on the camera that you need. You can flick a switch, you can record for more than 20 minutes or 29 minutes or whatever they're restricted to, depending what format you're recording. There's many advantages, and yet I know other people that use DSLRs and do some incredibly stunning work. And it would be wrong to say, well, that's not good enough for this sort of work, because you see their work and it looks great. But for myself, and certainly for a lot of situations, I would say a DSLR is not the right tool. So you've got to assess what you're doing and whether it really works. And this has become a pattern through every change of technology, what works, what doesn't, and how to get the best out of it.
Well, the thing is, we have more choices now. Once upon a time, the only choice was that digibeta workflow. I mean, it was the only viable alternative. You shot digibeta, you generally finished it up on 1-inch C format, and then you dumbed it down to whatever people wanted for distribution.
Whereas now, I don't know whether it's available yet, but announced before NAB was the time code back for GoPro cameras. So now you can choose to include a GoPro in professional time code based workflows, which is good because they've been using them anyway.
Yes, it has been a pain.
So many high-end television shows for the in-car shots or whatever.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the GoPro is a miracle camera. Look what you can actually do with the GoPro these days, what you guys are doing with it. But certainly for so many things, if you want an in-camera shot, if you want to put it in a small confined space, if you want to send it up in a hot air balloon, GoPro has become the standard on a lot of these shoots. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have other cameras as well that are being used all over the place.
Exactly.
But we're talking a small, I'm not even sure what they sell for here, but £200-300 in the UK.
Well, if you're smart, of course, it's too late now, but if you were smart and planned to buy a GoPro anytime soon, and you went to NAB, you would have signed up at the GoPro booth, as I did last year.
Oh, yeah.
And they give you $100 off any purchase within 30 days.
Wow.
In fact, it was $100 off each camera,
Yeah.
knocking the 2 GoPro Hero Blacks that we used down to $399 each, US.
Okay, well, that's not a lot of money, and you can shoot 4K on these, which means as you record, you can punch in on the image, you can do all sorts of amazing things. Now, talk about technology, you go back to the film days, they needed an optical printer and a lab to do that. Now, you were waiting quite a while to see your results. You had to imagine it and give the instructions to a guy at the other end. Now you just stick it into your computer and you can zoom in as much or as little as you like, push into a point, say, that's as far as I can go in on that shot. You've got tremendous flexibility.
Pushed into 210%, which was a slight zoom. But anything up to 200% is still 1-to-1 or better pixel ratio, because
So were you getting less than 1080 pixels in that image?
that one I started with fewer than 1080 pixels and blew them back up to 1080. Yes, that's about on this camera that's about as far as you can go before it starts to look appreciably soft.
And Ursa Mini by Blackmagic, that's 4.6K.
Yeah.
So you've got even that much more you can zoom in, and then Canon has their 8K cameras that they're talking about. I don't know a lot about those. Red has 6 and 8K. With that comes other problems because you're dealing with so much data, and you got obviously bigger storage requirements, more processing power, slower turnaround in terms of the editing, which is why I still work. most of my certainly paying work is done as HD. Because if I shoot 4K, I then just got to turn it back into HD for it to come out the other end, because that's the distribution means of today. Now, of course, there's advantages to shooting 4K. You can punch in on the image. It's always better to start with something bigger and shrink it down and, oversample its source. That makes a lot of sense.
The only other person I've ever heard use that.
Well, I probably got it from you. But no, it does make sense to do that. If you've got the time, if it's quick turnaround, you will only limit the production because 4K takes a lot to process. So it's not about the latest and greatest. It's not about the best technology that exists. It's what is appropriate and works best for what you're doing.
Yeah, with a lot more choice than ever we had before.
Tremendous choice. And you could probably choose many different options that would work. You could do it this way, you could do it that way or that way. But it's also what resources you've got. If you own cameras, you're going to use the cameras you have. You're not going to throw them away just because it's a new model. Unless it's going to offer you something tremendous.
So talking about on the theme of change, what do you think has been the most significant change in your career so far?
That's a big question.
Question.
I would have to say, well, there's two things because I shoot and I edit. So even though you'd asked me the most significant,
It doesn't even have to be just technology production. So I mean, we've had people who said the internet is the biggest change they've experienced.
I see. Well, I'd have to say probably the biggest change then would be the affordability of the equipment, because when I was working in television in the late 80s and 90s, I never thought that I would get to the stage where I could own cameras and editing gear. It was so prohibitively expensive. I just assumed that was the way it was always going to be. And whatever was affordable wasn't good enough. And if you wanted to do it at a high level, you had to basically go and pay to use a suite. That's how you had to do it.
And now you've got 6 Sony
Yeah, exactly.
You can actually carry it with you.
F3.
6 F3s, which are wonderful HD cameras. JVC 4K cameras, I've got 3 of those. I've got Blackmagics. I've got a Canon.
You've got a problem.
I hadn't finished with everything I'd got. Well, there's different arguments. I'm not talking about whether I've got a problem or not, but there is different arguments.
The person who hoards cameras? I don't know.
There are some people that sell everything on and some people that hold on to it, and I've certainly sold quite a lot on. But also, some of the cameras are very useful for different things, and you want to keep them because some of the big jobs I get hired for, I actually have to send people out with gear as well. So if I've got, well, my philosophy as a cameraman is I always come with 2 cameras, even if they only pay me for 1, because if something goes wrong, I've got a spare. If they hire me with 3 cameras, I bring 4. I always have a backup. So if I'm doing a job, wherever it might be in the UK, and there's another job, another conference somewhere, or another interview that needs to be done in Barcelona, I might send someone else to do that job. I'm going to send them with 2 cameras, because I don't want the job to screw up just because something technically goes wrong. And it's the same with editing. I need 2 laptops with me at all times in case it goes down. I need 3 hard drives, certainly 2, but I'm happier with 3, because you take what you've got, you back it up onto your second drive. Sometimes when it gets really big, you can't back it all up onto that second drive without wiping what's already there. So if you've cleared your backup and something screws up in the transfer or goes down, you've already wiped your backup. So you need 3 drives for that. So it's become my whole thing, and I think this really came from live television directing. You always need a backup. You always need to know where you're going. If the tape machine, okay, when I was live directing, it was off tape, and it had started moving to server-based stuff in the early 2000s, and I stopped 2002 for the live directing. But if the tape machine went down, you needed to know where you were going to go. Did you have another machine which would have had the items that could be played out from, and if not, what is on that other machine? I mean, you really don't want to have to call presentation and go to a slide, which has had to be done as well. Or worst of all, fade to black on the vision mixer. So that discipline of live directing is carried through to everything else. So I always want backup and somewhere to go. It's very important. And then if something goes wrong on the job, and something is always going to go wrong, at least it's not going to be the technology that totally lets you down, because if the technology lets you down, you've got more technology to fill in that gap, at least according to the way I do it.
So the most significant change has been
The affordability of the gear. The fact that I can now buy cameras and editing gear, and I don't have to spend as much as a house to buy it. That is the most important thing. And it really was at that level. And we spoke earlier, in 1998, maybe 1997, I set up my first non-linear editing system, and I bought 5 SCSI drives, 9 gigabytes each, and it cost me £4,500.
Yeah.
And that's quite a lot of money for a bunch of drives that you couldn't even get £10 for the whole set these days. I mean, they're worth nothing.
I had it.
And they were fussy as hell, because they had to be, you had to have the right numbers, and they had to be...
They were spec'd in certain ways, and
piece on them or something.
If you entered the industry after the era of SCSI being universal, thank your lucky stars, because SCSI was pretty SCSI to deal with.
It was. I'm just trying to remember all of the...
You had to assign the right port. You had to make sure that it was terminated properly, not double terminated. Oh, God.
Yeah, it's it's a bit like online editing and having to work with EDLs and think in numbers. That was a very strong discipline that I was put through. It's a bit like going through the army in a way. I'm sure it teaches you discipline, but you know, there's a big price to pay for that, meaning you have to do a lot of hard work.
If that's the biggest change you've experienced, what do you think will be the biggest change going forward? Do you see, looking forward, that what do you think will be the change in that next 30 years of your career?
30 years of my career, they'll take me to almost 80 years old.
Don't retire early.
I don't think I ever will retire. Even if I stop doing one line of work, I'll just fill it in with another because it keeps me motivated just to be working. I do enjoy what I do. The biggest change coming, it's probably something we can't even or don't even know about now. It could be, but okay, it's almost upon us already, and this might not be a good answer because it's not looking 30 years ahead, but the fact that we can produce cinema quality images at affordable prices, it means that the bastions of distribution, the bastions of high-end production are open to everyone. Now that doesn't mean we can all get our movie into a cinema, but it kind of really kicked in with Red and then accelerated with Blackmagic, with the raw recording they've offered in their cameras. Now we have a digital negative to work with. So I think there'll be a progression of all that sort of thing that will have exceedingly high quality that anyone can access anywhere. But that's not 30 years away or even 10 years away. That's virtually upon us and happening now. So
yeah, keeping in mind that 30 years ago there was no internet.
Yeah, well, it'll be a lot of cloud-based material. Everything will be more accessible. Like I said, I think there's going to be things we haven't even conceived of yet. I mean, even the other night at the Super Meet in Las Vegas, they were talking about VR technology. And I was looking at the book on your shelf by Ray Bradbury earlier, who I'm a big fan of. And I remember, you know, probably a piece he wrote in the 50s, talked about children going inside this room. And they were basically in a whole VR world. And it was so real, they were basically being killed by lions, if I remember the story correctly. And I don't know if that's where we're heading, but that could be one possibility. Personally, I like 2D on the screen, watching it, and maybe I'm old and living in the past. 3D never has really done it for me. I've seen some good 3D. If it's shot properly in 3D and it's done well, it can be quite good. But
maybe VR is just a fad.
Well, it could be. It depends how good it gets. And do we have to really wear headsets all the time? You know, these are issues.
Well, for the same reason that 3D in the home never seemed like a viable reality, because you know, even the sets that let you do headset free still had limitations. You can move your head like this and you see different angles through graded shot.
It was really making the assumption that the audience was going to sit down in a specific place in front of the TV and just watch that, and that's not the way people consume television in the home, because everybody's doing all sorts of things and walking
TV,
in and out.
Preparing a drink or preparing a meal. This is how TV is consumed. And I think VR is a little bit like that as well. As a gaming experience, I think VR will be awesome. Remote operations, remote controlling of vehicles, I guess, you know, even in military applications, there's, you know, being able to see all around is going to be an advantage.
Well, of course, in military perspective, the people who were the inventors of what eventually became Cinerama were creating a virtual reality environment to train fighter pilots. They had, I think, 3 screens in the middle, 2 up, 2 below, and then, of course, the surround sound thing, because they wanted to train fighter pilots without putting them in a real plane, so they had to create a simulation.
No, I totally get that. Yeah, it's astounding what we've seen in such a short period of time, and it really makes me wonder in even 5 or 10 years what will be coming, because there's always the incremental shifts where things get better. They get, you know, better processing, better sensors, whatever. And then there's the cataclysmic shifts where everything changes big time. Like going from film to tape, like going from tape to NLE editing, like shooting on basically flash media. And even DSLRs was a huge shift, because suddenly we could use those wonderful photographic lenses for image acquisition in a very simple, easy, affordable way. And I don't know what the next cataclysmic shift is going to be, but it could be that there's major things coming that we haven't even conceived of. I mean, it could be editors that instead of working with a mouse or a trackpad, we're doing a lot of stuff with our hands, moving clips around, picking that one up, dropping it there, just swiping across things.
Or even direct from thinking processes. A long time, 2 or 3 years ago, I saw a TED talk where it's a very simple helmet with just 5 sensors on it, and somebody who had only been trained for 45 minutes ahead of time could actually move something on screen and fade it out.
Yes.
And now that, just to be able to think and fade something out is incredibly interesting, because we can't fade something out in the real world. So something fading away is not something that we have a visual recollection of seeing inside the real world. So being able to imagine something fading away and make the action happen. So I don't know how long it is before we are really just trim left, trim right,
Well, it could be, and I did read in the last week about, excuse me, I read in the last week about someone with an artificial arm, like a bionic arm, and they could control it with their thoughts.
Yes,
So that's got to infiltrate certainly the creative realms into what we're doing. And as long as it doesn't take anything away from the process and it adds to it, I'm happy. It's when technology goes in one direction and it's like, you're not happy about that because it doesn't work the same way and it doesn't necessarily offer you the same thing. I haven't got a concrete example to point to of that sort of thing, but it does happen.
Well, in a way, a lot of people in Hollywood complain that, well, I've certainly had some editors complain that Media Composer ruined reality television editing, because it can be done in a week. As soon as you show a producer that things can be done faster, they're not going to give you 3 weeks to cut that anymore. They're going to give you 1 week. Well, in the 1 week, there's a lot less thinking time, a lot less contemplative time in the editing process than there would have been in 3 weeks. You're still going to get a result that's acceptable, and of course that's what a producer is paying for, is the result that is acceptable, which, in the case of a feature film is a lot higher bar than the case of a movie of the week, as a TV show, as of a corporate, as of a whatever, family video. These have different desirable bars to get to. Right. So if you were advising somebody starting out now, what career advice would you give somebody?
Well, if they want to work in the production scene, video and editing or filmmaking, first of all, do you really want to do it? I mean, is this really what you want to do? Because a friend of my wife once said to her that her son, well, he might want to do media. And I said to my wife, if he wants to do media, he really needs to want to do it. Yeah. It doesn't mean there aren't jobs that are not, by people that are not totally driven, but it's a competitive industry. Yeah. And a lot of people might work in it and then they might not have those opportunities and they kind of get booted out along the way. And I remember that happening in the 80s in television as well. Some people would leave the industry for whatever reason. There might be redundancies and they never get back in. Yeah. So if you really want to do it, you need to have some sort of passion for it, I would have thought. And if you've got that, read as much and learn as much as you can, and you'll know if that's your path, if that's what you need to do. And in terms of breaking in, you need to start somewhere, and don't have too many dreams of where you need to be. It's where you can get in and what you can learn. It's what you can contribute, not what you can take, because they don't like young kids coming in that seem to know everything, because no one knows everything, even the people that have been doing it 20 years or longer. And if you have been doing it that long, you do know a lot. You might not be as cutting edge as some of the young ones, but you have discipline that the young ones can't possibly have. Mm-hmm. So if you're starting off, just recognize that you need to, it's an industry where you need to work. It's a job. And it might be a job where you work 16, 18 hours a day, and it will be, certainly on some of the work I've been doing, even in the last month. Very intense, but you need to be driven to do it. You need to want to do it. And okay, so you want to do it. What is it you want to do? I mean, are you trying to be George Lucas, Steven Spielberg? Are you trying to... I kind of think that success is, if you love what you're doing, that's success. Right. So find your way in and work out what it is you want to be doing in the industry. You don't have to be picking up cameras or editing. There's jobs for non-technical people and technical people. There's jobs for all sorts. Yeah. The one thing...
Or you could be like me and just make your own job the entire time. I've never...
independent.
The only time I've actually had an employer that wasn't a company that I had some controlling stake in was my first job in the theatre. Live theatre was a long time ago. But since then I've essentially made my own opportunities, sometimes well, sometimes not so well.
Yeah, and the other important thing is, are you okay to get along with? Can people stand being with you?
Yeah.
I mean, the attitude is a big part of it. I've known people on jobs that, well, we can't possibly put this person in front of the client, so they might not get hired for whatever reason. If you've got an attitude that doesn't gel well, and a lot of what you do, you have to work in crews.
Yep. So shower and use toothpaste.
That's important, but also don't alienate people.
No.
Don't, and especially if you're young and cocky about it, you'll alienate people quite quickly. It doesn't matter sometimes how good you are. You need to be good at a certain level. You can be brilliant, but if they don't want you there, they won't have you, and that's very important. So that's only a little, a little answer. I'm sure I can think of more things.
I think that's good advice. So, if people want to find you and get in touch with you now, how could they do that?
Look at my website, moviemachine.tv, and you will certainly find a link on the website. You can email me there. Look on Amazon, Easy Guide to Final Cut Pro 10. That's the book I've written. That's out there. You just look me up, Rick Young, video, filmmaker, that sort of thing. You'll find me.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rick. Thank you very much for having lunch with Philip and Greg.
And thank you for the lunch. It's great. And the company. Cool, guys.